Hi there, this is Dr. Moyer, and I know you haven't heard my voice in quite a while, and I apologize profusely for that. That's not what I intended to happen, but some things got away from me, and it did happen. Anyways, we are going to look at Bandura and Erikson's theories today and talk about them, and hopefully you guys will have an understanding of it after we go through it. So we'll start with Bandura. Most people are pretty familiar with Bandura. He was the person who developed the social modeling theory, or social learning theory, sometimes it's called. And he's actually still alive. Most of the theorists we talk about are not still alive. He was born in 1925. He was born in Canada. And he actually accidentally fell into psychology, loved it, ended up getting his PhD at the University of Iowa, became faculty at Stanford, and in 1974 he was elected president of the American Psychological Association. While he was president, he got everybody or organized the members to fight federal budget cuts to psychological services. So he wasn't just one of those presidents that sat back and did nothing. He did a lot. Through his career, he's received a lot of awards and honors, and he's praised very often for his mentorship. So, the basic concepts of social learning theory. The basic idea is that children learn from watching others, either directly, vicariously, or symbolically. Bandura believed that the process is cognitive, though. He didn't believe it was just simply copying others. He believed that children have to rely on some type of inner representation, and also about the consequences of the behavior through observation. So, not quite as simplistic as it sometimes is painted to be. I threw this in because in my day, in the 80s, growing up, we had a lot of after-school specials. And it makes me think of learning theory when I think of learning theory, because it's like, here you have Scott Baio from Happy Days, and he is Jack Mellon, he's a good student, and then he gets into pot and gets into deep trouble. And then you see, so all these specials are pretty much the same. Good kids go down the wrong path, face these horrible consequences, and then they realize the mistakes they've made, straighten out, and learn their lesson. And learning theory makes me think that the people that created this were familiar with that theory and thought, if we show other kids messing up and then getting straight, maybe it'll help all of our children. And the reason I'm giggling is because they were so cheesy. If you ever get a chance, just watch one, you'll see what I mean. Okay, moving on. So there are 4 components to social learning theory. Number 1 is attentional processes. And this means this is focused on like who the model is. They have to be somebody that's interesting to us. So it can't just be anybody. Going back to Scott Baio, at the time he was very popular. He was kind of the, let me think. Who is a hot young actor right now? Wow, this is really bad. Ryan Reynolds, I think, is probably pretty hot right now. But for teens, I don't really know. I'm too old. 46, just out of the loop. But anyways, the model has to matter. It has to be somebody that is either distinctive or popular, catches our attention, or they're similar to us. They have some sort of success or prestige, power, other qualities. And TV is really good at presenting models with engaging characteristics to us, and that's why it ends up exerting a powerful influence on our life. Social learning theory is tied a great deal to children learning behaviors from watching TV. The second component is retentional processes, and this refers to the notion that we have to have some way to remember what the model did. So Bandura labeled this stimulus contiguity. Oh my God, I can't believe I just said it like that. Stimulus contiguity. Usually we have some sort of verbal cues, something that reminds us of what the behavior entailed and what the consequences were. So we have to have some kind of retention clue. The third component is motor reproduction processes. This just simply means that we have to have the skill set to reproduce the behavior accurately. So children may not have learned how to manage scissors yet, but they may pretend that they are cutting something without scissors, like mimicking the behavior. But until they actually have the motor skills, they can't reproduce it accurately. Reinforcement and motivational processes. When we observe a model, we acquire new skills and behaviors. But that doesn't necessarily mean we'll perform them. So performances are governed by reinforcement and motivation. If we think we're going to gain a reward, we're more likely to imitate the behavior. If we see someone punished, we're less likely to model the behavior. Kind of makes sense when you think about it, but this really just refers to the idea that we don't just go around watching everything as children, everything that happens, everything that's done, and do it. There have to be these components, and it matters who is modeling this behavior. So I found a picture of the Bobo doll. Actually, this one's labeled Bozo, but I think it's similar. You may have heard of the Bobo doll studies. That's what Bandura is actually very, very popular for. So he conducted a number of socialization studies, the big one being the one on aggression, where he had children. They were 4 years old. They watched film clips individually that featured an adult male engaged in, I guess, what we would call moderately aggressive behavior. So an adult male putting the Bobo doll on its side, sitting on it, punching it, yelling at it, etc. And then there were 3 different conditions. The first one was the aggression was rewarded. So somebody came in and rewarded him and told him it was good. The second one is the aggression was punished. So somebody came in and told him it was bad. And the third condition, there was no consequences. And children were more likely to model the behavior after the aggression was rewarded or there were no consequences. So it seems when children are, when they think there's a reward or they think there's no consequences to engaging in a behavior that they've seen modeled, that they'll engage in that same behavior. Gender roles. During socialization, children are taught to behave in gender-appropriate ways. Boys are rewarded for behaving in masculine ways, and girls in feminine ways. What's interesting about this is I've often heard, as you have too, probably, I'm sure, parents make the statement that, oh, he's such a boy, or you can tell the difference, and she's a girl. And there are certainly there are some inherent personality traits that go along with children, but we also, as a society, help form what's considered appropriate for males and appropriate for females. So if males are fooling around, wrestling, I remember my brother and our cousin Andy used to always wrestle. They were our younger brothers, and we had some female cousins too that were older. My sister and I so we would play with the girls and the boys would play together, and the boys always wrestled. They were always like crashing around, and this behavior seemed very bizarre to us as children. But they did it, and they never really got in trouble for it unless they got carried away, what parents called carried away. And that usually meant that they crashed into something, maybe something broke or someone got hurt. Unless those consequences occurred, though, they were pretty much left alone. However, if the girls engage in this kind of behavior, and I can only think of one example for sure, but we were playing kickball, all of us, children, my cousins and I, and we kind of all got into like a pit, what you would call a pig pile, and the parents intervened and said, "Oh my gosh, girls, you know better. The boys we understand, but girls know better than to behave like this." So there was a clear delineation between how the males were acting, how the females were acting, and clearly it was okay for the boys, but not so much for the girls. Pro-social behavior. We've tried through the years to use social learning theory to get children to engage in pro-social behavior. It turns out that the research shows you can't just tell children to share, and this is where the theory comes into play. You have to actually model it. So parents that don't engage in sharing behavior themselves, but then tell their children and admonish their children for not sharing, they're going to find it difficult to get their children to actually buy into that. So if you want children to engage in pro-social behavior, then you yourself have to engage in pro-social behavior so that they see what it's like and they see that there's rewards for it. This also increases empathy, cooperativeness, and concern for other, meaning the other person. So it's a good idea. Everybody wins if we model pro-social behavior. Self-regulation. Children tend to adopt the evaluative standards of peers rather than adults, because children can more easily achieve the lower standards that peers typically set for themselves. So children will tend to self-regulate based upon what their peers are doing or saying, but this can be influenced by encouraging children to strive, to work harder, to accomplish tasks, and then this can influence other children that are, modeling themselves after these children that you're encouraging. So, okay, that concludes the socialization studies. Self-efficacy. So Bandura became concerned in the 70s and 80s, and I think continues today, to be concerned with self-efficacy, which refers to reflecting on our general abilities, our performances, and our beliefs about whether we can do, I put accomplish in parentheses, something or not. So basically, do you feel confident that you can do it? Talk about self-efficacy a lot with adolescent pregnancy. Do adolescents feel like they can be good parents and they're able to handle the responsibilities? And if they have a lot of self-efficacy, then they often can. Bandura stated that if we think we're good at something or believe we're good at something, we work hard at it, even if we're thrown roadblocks and we experience setbacks. On the other hand, if we don't believe we're good at something, we're more likely to give up when we encounter difficulties. And so the idea is that self-efficacy is very positive, and if someone has it, they will continue to work hard and they'll continue to push in spite of even running into difficulties. Where if someone doesn't, then they'll give up. They're more likely to give up. And this reminds me of math and girls. Again, some gender differences, but reminds me of how we learned in the 90s and the early 2000s about the fact that there really were no differences between men and women, or girls and boys' ability to do things like spatial reasoning and math, engineering, stuff that had been attributed to the male, or it was a male-dominated field typically. And this bled into teachers and parents buying into this and not encouraging girls to go into careers that involved engineering. Not all parents, of course, or all teachers, but in general. And that just makes me think of Barbie, math is just too hard. Let's go shopping. And I know that for me, I taught myself to read a map when my sister and brother, sorry, I only have one of each, and their partners, and then my husband and I drove in a van to Florida from Maine. My parents had moved there the year before, and we decided we were going to rent a van and go there and drive all night. And of course, this was before the days of GPS and even really before the internet, because we couldn't like print out directions. We had to get, oh God, they were horrible, like mapped, I don't even know what they're called, trip tickets through AAA, and they just showed pieces of maps. So we ended up buying this big atlas and kind of mapping out where we were, and I at times played co-pilot and at other times I drove, but I realized when I was co-pilot I was going to have to learn how to read a map. And so my sister and I, we worked hard at it. She kind of gave up. I was just determined. I'm like, I am going to read this damn map. I don't care what it takes. I can do this. And I would flip the map upside down if I had to, so to figure out where I was in context to the rest of the map. And it worked. By the time I got back, I could read maps, and I continue to read them well. And I find that sometimes men can't even read them. It just depends, but it's a skill I have, and I'm proud of it, and I believe in my success. And so girls can read maps and do well. Sources of self-efficacy appraisal, so actual performance, when you actually succeed at something, especially many times, then you're not troubled by setbacks, roadblocks, or frustrations, because your past performances have shown that you can do it. And this is why it's really good if you are working or mentoring or talking to somebody who is having difficulty, they're facing some sort of adversity, and you're trying to encourage resilience in them. You might ask somebody, have you overcome something like this before? And remind them that they have. If somebody's had some kind of experience that's similar, and they might say, well, yeah, actually, I lost my job in 2008, and it was hard to bounce back, but I did. And so you remind them, and that's part of self-efficacy, that people can do it. The second source is vicariously. So if we see others do it, particularly those that look like us or are a lot like us, then we believe we can too. And then there's the good old verbal persuasion or pep talk, when someone convinces us we can do it. So you may not believe that you can do it, but somebody says to you, of course you can, you have the skills, and you can do this, and you start to buy into it. Bandura believed that self-efficacy develops over the lifespan. So there are different stages. He didn't lay out like a stage theory like Erikson does, but he talked about how infants explore their environment, they get a sense of control over it. And then as children grow, their social world grows, and they look to their peers as a source of social comparison. And then young adults evaluating new skills and capabilities as parents and as employees. And then older adults facing life adjustments and retirement. But all of this, at the root of it, is self-efficacy. Practical implications for Bandura's theory. Probably the most popular application has been child rearing, and parents needing to remember that they teach by modeling. In one of the studies that's talked about in your textbook, and that a lot of people tend to point to when they're talking about applications, research has shown that when parents use spanking as their primary form of discipline, they notice that their children don't always stop engaging in aggression if that's what they're being punished for, with other children, perhaps because they've learned that that's how you solve problems. So that is where the greatest implication is for Bandura's theory. Evaluation, Bandura would say that modeling is not as powerful or as successful performances of one's own. So you could see where he's, leaning more towards self-efficacy in his later years. But, the theory is very popular. I find that a lot of graduate students really kind of grab onto it. It makes sense to them. And I think in a world where we see a lot more media, that Bandura's theory has kind of bounced back, received a revival. So that's Bandura, and that is social theory. Let's move on to Erikson. And so what do I have to say about Erikson? I love this theory. This is one of my favorite theories because it makes sense to me. Everybody has the theory they love, and this happens to be one that I love. This is one of the most cited theories. People will cite it a lot, particularly in our field, to figure out, what stage people are in, what stage. And we have a family, the family life cycle theory as well. But looking at individual development, Erikson's theory is kind of the crown jewel. Erikson believed that children develop in a predetermined order, much like Piaget. He worked with Anna Freud, so he built on Freud's theory, but he took it further and went beyond psychosexual development. So here is a figure of the different stages, and just to kind of break it down for you, and I'll go through each of the stages as well. Your book does as well, but note that in the beginning they weren't labeled these names. He changed them later. So the very first stage is trust versus mistrust, and this happens from birth to about 18 months. So children they begin to learn the ability to trust based upon the consistency of their caregivers. We haven't talked about attachment theory in this class, and I don't think we will because it refers primarily to just, well, it actually does. It could count, but anyways, I'm getting off track. But attachment theory has a lot to do with trust as well. And the theory basically says that if children don't feel secure when they're babies and infants, that they will feel that the world is not secure, and they'll feel threatened. And that this can result in an inability to trust others, a sense of fear about the world. It can result in anxiety, heightened insecurities, just mistrust in the world around them. So the ability to develop trust is very important. And it is bidirectional. It has a lot to do with the parents as well, because when the parents respond to children in a consistent manner, then children learn to develop trust. They trust that their parents will be there. The second stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt, occurs from about 18 months to 3 years. And so between the ages of 1 and 3, children begin to assert their independence. They start walking away from, they've developed the ability to walk, and they start walking away from their mother. They start wanting to pick out toys to play with. They want to make choices about what they like to wear, what they like to eat. Potty training occurs during this time. They often want to control when they go. And if children are encouraged and supported in their increased independence, then they become much more confident and secure in their ability to survive in the world. But if they're criticized or overly controlled or not given the opportunity to assert themselves, they can feel inadequate in their ability to survive, and then they can become overly dependent upon others, lack self-esteem, and they can even feel a sense of shame or doubt in their own abilities. Each of these, I meant to point out that each of these is a crisis that Erikson says that we have to overcome in order to develop a healthy personality and sense of self. And so At each point, there is a crisis to overcome, and if a child doesn't overcome it, they can still move through the stages, but they won't, like say they never did develop trust, they're going to have difficulties with trust their whole life. They can go back and deal with trust with the professional, and that, that may take a long time, but that is something they can go back and revisit. So it's not that the door is closed forever. It's just more difficult. Okay, from ages 3 to 5, some say 3 to 6 years, you have the initiative versus guilt stage. And around this age, children start to assert themselves even more frequently. They want to plan activities, they want to make up games, they want to initiate activities with other people, children and adults. And if they're given this opportunity, they'll develop a sense of initiative and feel secure in their ability to lead and make decisions. But if this tendency is squelched, either through criticism or control, children develop a sense of guilt. They may feel like a nuisance to others and will therefore remain a follower, and they'll lack self-initiative. When I think about this, I think about my niece, Bella, who is now 9, but when she was between 3 and 6, and we would visit, she would often set up little, like she might have a fortune teller stand, or she would sometimes just get toys and pretend to be selling them. Or she'd come around and collect information. She'd ask you questions. But she was very busy. She was always making up these games, and she initiated all this herself. No one told her to do it. And she was the only child at the time, so, she was working with adults, and she included us. And I see that, by allowing her to do this, that she does have a sense of initiative now. It's really interesting to watch children develop. Industry versus inferiority from the ages of 5 to about 13. Children begin to develop a sense of pride in their accomplishments, particularly things that they do at school. They initiate projects, they see them through completion, they feel good about what they've achieved. And during this time, teachers are really important in the child's development. If children are encouraged and reinforced for their initiative, they begin to feel industrious and feel confident in their ability to achieve their goals. But if the initiative is not encouraged, if it's restricted by the parents and or the teacher, then the child can feel inferior, doubting their own abilities, and they may not reach their potential. And potential implies even through adulthood. The identity versus role confusion, ages 13 to about 21 years. During adolescence, the transition from childhood to adulthood is very important. In fact, Erikson's theory has probably been used or tested empirically the most when it comes to identity, when this stage is happening. So during this, children are becoming more independent. They're starting to think about what they want to do in terms of their career, relationships, families, where they want to live, etc. They're learning to drive. They're learning to, sometimes they get a job and they're managing their own money. So during this period, they explore possibilities and begin to form their own identity based upon the outcome of those explorations. This sense of who they are can be hindered. I'm sorry, lost my place in my notes. The sense of who they are can be hindered, which can result in a world of confusion. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, about themselves and their role in the world. And so that's sometimes called a moratorium on role identity. They have no idea what they want to do. So it's important that children during this stage are allowed to explore opportunities and to figure out, what kind of choices they would like to make in order to, where they want to go to college, or if they want to go to college, what kind of skills they would like to develop. And it's kind of hard because they're still very young, but they do generally have an idea of what they enjoy and what they'd like to do. The next stage is called intimacy versus isolation, and this is during the young adult years, 21 to 39. So at this point, adults begin to share themselves with others more intimately. They explore relationships leading towards longer-term commitments with someone other than a family member. And successful completion of this stage can lead to healthy and comfortable relationships, a sense of commitment, safety, and care. And if they have come through the other stages, they will feel trust. They will still have an identity within that relationship. They will feel that they are industrious and autonomous. So the other stages are important in building in here. Otherwise, they may avoid intimacy, they may be afraid of commitment, and end up isolated, lonely, and sometimes even depressed. Then, ages 40 to 65, you have generativity versus stagnation. And this is middle adulthood, when people have typically established their careers. They have settled down with a relationship, they have a family or started one, and they start to get a sense of being part of the bigger picture. They realize it's important to give back through raising children or contributing to the raising of others' children, being productive at work, and becoming involved in community activities and organizations. If they don't achieve these objectives, they can feel stagnant and unproductive, and that can lead to depression and isolation as well. Then the last stage is called ego, integrity versus despair, ages 65 and older, so older adulthood. As we grow older and become senior citizens, we tend to slow down our productivity, and we explore life from a different perspective. It is during this time that we typically contemplate our accomplishments and are able to develop integrity if we see ourselves as leading a successful life. If we see our lives as being unproductive or feel guilt about our past or feel that we didn't accomplish something, our major life goal, for example, we become dissatisfied with life and often feel despair. And this can lead to depression and hopelessness and even anger. And I have experienced this with some relatives in my life. I know that have dealt with some guilt, and you can see that. You can see how this has an effect on them. But again, Erikson would always say it's not too late. You can always go back to every stage and revisit and deal with the things that you need to. His whole point was, all of these things are important, but, and we all go through these stages, but you can revisit them and go back. So an evaluation of Erikson's theory. It's still used a lot today. I've already mentioned that, actually. In fact, it's very popular. It emphasized the importance of adolescence and identity. I kind of alluded to that. So most of the empirical work has focused on identity. And it really brought identity development into the light and focused on just how important that is and how it can continue, actually, beyond adolescence. So Marcia began that work in 1966, but there's plenty of other work about identity development. I encourage you to check it out if that's something you're interested in. Oh, I thought I had another slide, but I guess I don't. So that concludes this talk on Bandura and Erikson. Thank you for listening.